What the hell? Wow. Nice aimbot. Nice aimbot. You're lagging. You're lagging. Lag switch. What did you say about my mother?
Come on, bro. Pick up.
You're really trash. You're just straight garbage. Hold on, Grandma. I gotta go. Bro?
Oh, thank God you picked up, man. There's some weird shit happening, and I'm kind of freaking out about it.
Damn, bro. What's going on?
For the past few nights, I've been seeing these pale-looking weirdos in my neighborhood.
Bro, are you serious? That's what you called me for?
Yeah. I feel like I'm in danger or something. They're just standing outside of my house, like, staring in at me.
Bro, I think they're Jehovah's Witnesses. We've been seeing the same people come around our neighborhood for the past week. They just must be new recruits or something, so they're scared to knock on doors. They just stare for a little and just move on to the next house.
You've been seeing the same people, too?
Yeah, bro, come on. You didn't think they were vampires or something, did you? We live in America, not Transylvania or whatever.
Well, and how do you explain the weird cloaks they're wearing?
Bro, that's the style right now. Everyone's wearing those things. Even my girlfriend started wearing one.
Really? I didn't know that. But I don't know, it still feels a little off. Like, I walked by one of them the other day and he hissed at me.
Bro, you gotta stay up on things. That's the new TikTok trend. It's basically the new sheesh.
Really? Damn. Okay, I guess. Can you imagine vampires? Anyway, anything else going on in your life?
Yeah, actually. I mean, since we were just talking about my girlfriend, I think she's going through a goth phase.
Nah, are you serious?
Yeah, I mean, she's been getting really into it, like making her skin all pale, wearing black all the time. I thought at first that it was just because she's been working the graveyard shift a lot recently, but I think at this point it's just becoming like a real lifestyle thing.
Bro, you got a kinky goth GF?
Yeah, I guess so. I mean, she has been getting into biting and stuff. I think I'm kind of into it.
Maybe she's a vampire.
Ooh, maybe. Anyways, I gotta go, bro. I gotta go to the store to get some Benadryl cream. I got these like mosquito bites on my neck last night. I think I'm having like a reaction or something.
Okay, Briggs. I'll catch you later. Come on, bro. Come on. Oh, come on. Come on, bro. Pick up the damn phone already.
Bro?
Bro, I'm so glad you finally answered.
Is everything okay? Why are you calling me so early?
What do you mean? It's 3 p.m., bro.
Damn. Must have gone ham on the lactose stouts last night. My head is killing me.
Bro, you're talking about getting lit on lactose stouts? Do you realize what's happening?
Oh my god.
You finally get it. You finally see what's happening. It's Spooktober!
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 Spooktober. Spooktober. Spooktober.
Spooktober!
Spooktober. 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 Spooktober.
Spooktober! Spooktober!
Spooktober! Spooktober! Spooktober!
Hey aficionados, Miguel here to wish you a happy Spooktober and to introduce our 2021 Spooktober special review, Nosferatu. That's right, this is the absolutely legendary vampire film from 1922 directed by F.W. Murnau. It's a German expressionist silent film, and it is basically an unofficial adaptation of Bram Stoker's Dracula. The titular character, of course, being the vampire Nosferatu, or Count Orlok, played by Max Schreck. A lot of the plot elements are very similar to Dracula. You'll notice if you've watched or read the book and then watched this film. Although there are some slight deviations that make it kind of interesting to talk about.
There's a few different versions floating around, and Miguel and I actually ended up watching two different versions. So the version that I watched used all the original character names, but the version that Miguel watched used characters from the book. And I think it was actually flipping back and forth for you too, right?
Yes, it was. So it was very odd. Some scenes he'd be called Harker, some scenes it would use Dracula, other scenes Nosferatu. And of course you had Renfield in there, which I thought was very interesting because the differences between the Renfield in this film and the Renfield in the American Dracula are very, very stark.
In this version, the character is a real estate agent, basically, and he's the employer of our protagonist, Hutter. And he sends him away to Count Orlok's castle, basically knowingly sending him potentially to his death, and is almost mocking him for it. And that begins part of my problems with the Hutter character. The way you're introduced to him, it's almost like this kind of oblivious guy who's excited to basically leave his wife behind and like go trudging off to his potential death. It's pretty bizarre.
It's very similar to traditional European narratives in the kind of post-Renaissance era, which focus on young, energetic, idealistic men who set off on adventure, and it's an adventure of discovery and growth and them demonstrating their virtue to the world. And so you have this character of Harker or Hutter. He's just so flat as a character as a result because he's just an archetype. But what I think is very interesting is that rather than this film being a story of Harker's virtue, which is what you would expect in a traditional narrative like this, instead that narrative is subverted, where Harker becomes, basically through his naivete and through his arrogance, because he doesn't believe the locals and their warnings as he's traveling, he becomes entrapped by Count Orlok, and he gets taken advantage of and locked away in his castle, as Count Orlok then sets out to go and potentially victimize his wife. So instead of this being a story about Harker's virtue, it's actually a cautionary tale.
There are extremely heavy themes of abuse going on between Count Orlok and Hutter. You have the imagery of Orlok preying on Hutter while he sleeps, kind of distracting him with food and basically grooming Hutter. I think the horror aspects really come in on the scene where Hutter does finally come to terms and realize what's going on, and his reaction to that, and just how horrified and traumatized he is in that scene.
Hutter realizes that he's been bitten and he's been fed on. Now, in this film, being fed on doesn't mean you get turned into a vampire, but it is this remarkable moment for him where he realizes, oh my god, this count fed on me, and he becomes terrified in his room, and then he looks out the door and he can see Orlok standing, down the hallway staring at him. And it's this just sinister, grotesque, disturbing scene where this person in this moment of vulnerability is now facing their abuser, and he becomes terrified and he hides under his bed sheets, and you just see Orlok getting closer and closer, coming into the room, and there's a sense of dread there that I actually viscerally felt. And you'd think, oh, it's a film from 1922, it's a silent film, how can it really convey terror? But because of the way it was set up, it just worked so well. And that scene in particular, I think, is one of the strongest scenes in the entire film, because one, you get the shot of Orlok down the hall, and then you get another shot of Orlok's shadow over Hutter as Hutter cowers under his sheets, and the shadow descends and descends and descends onto him. I mean, the imagery of sexual abuse couldn't be more obvious.
It shows his process of luring in his victims. First takes them in, obviously, in the stagecoach, and it's almost like as it progresses, he starts to reveal more of himself to his victim as like the victim gets more comfortable being around him. In fact, in the beginning, he's wearing this like sort of goofy looking hat over his head to kind of hide some of his deformities. So when you finally do get to see that first full shot of him in that full on like gorgeously ugly like prosthetic makeup and pieces, it looks so creepy and so convincing. I think part of the reason why it's so disturbing too is because it's human, but there's just things that are just slightly off with it. It has these rat-looking teeth. It's got the pointy ears. It's obviously has that kind of big, bulging, bald dome head that everyone recognizes. He's got like the claws, and even just the way that he moves around. Max Schreck he just did such a good job portraying this creepy vampire villain in this movie. Even like the dimensions of the character too, like it's almost like he has no neck himself. He's just like a giant pair of shoulders with these like long lanky legs. It almost reminded me of like the episode of SpongeBob where he takes Pearl on a date and he's got like the long legs. And you can totally see how this character design has influenced so many other horror characters after it. Even just offhand, some of the ones that I can think of that have similar sort of looks, maybe like the creatures in The Descent a little bit, or especially like the Babadook.
I think it is important to kind of recognize the historical era we're talking about in the culture of 1922 Germany. Count Orlok comes on the screen and he has this massive hook nose. He's rendered to be very rat-like. He's associated in the story basically with the plague, with bringing rats. He's from the East, and he's basically like wants to move into Germany so that he can have access to all the young Germans. And he becomes obsessed with this virginal young German girl, Hutter's wife. So the sort of xenophobic allegory just seemed very obvious to me. And so there is this debate then, is the character an anti-Semitic caricature? Is this intentional? And then, as a consequence, is Nosferatu still tainted by that today? Or has he, as a character, almost outlived the historical circumstance that birthed him, and now people don't even really connect him with it at all? And another thing that I think is interesting on this point is the director, F.W. Murnau, was himself a gay man, and apparently he had some pretty strong and supportive friendships with Jewish people. However, I don't think that discounts the fact that he may have been trafficking in anti-Semitic tropes for the sake of movie making, just because he's coming from a very anti-Semitic culture, number one, and also they're easy tropes to connect with the fears of the audience, right? He's making this for a German audience. They have these cultural associations with these stereotypes that they've absorbed. I think it's definitely a complicated issue to discuss. I don't think it's completely settled historically, but I also think it's impossible to ignore.
And there's also an association in this film between vampires and parasites and creatures that sort of trap their prey helplessly, which again, if you're looking at it a little bit more surface level, also ties into the themings of abuse that we're talking about. For example, like Count Orlok is not a very powerful or intimidating man in terms of physical attributes, but the way that he entraps his victims is much more like something like a Venus flytrap, for example, in the movie, or a spider. It's something that catches you in its web, and before you know it, you're stuck and you can't move.
Like you said, it's interesting how Van Helsing, in his presentation in this, he talks about the vampires of the natural world, and he says that these are Venus flytraps and polyps, which are both passive predators, as you said. And so these passive predators, they work by tricking, manipulating their prey, by relying on the naivete of their victims, who don't realize that they're walking into a dangerous situation. It's disturbing on multiple levels. It's disturbing on the level of, sexual abuse, because the reality is the majority of sexual abuse is done in a way that's kind of more insidious, where someone who you don't think is dangerous ends up manipulating you into a situation where they can take advantage of you. And so it's disturbing on that level, but it's also disturbing on the greater social level of, this kind of plays into that anti-Semitic propaganda narrative of the innocent young Germans being entrapped by the crafty, manipulative, vampiric Jews. So, yeah, very interesting.
I want to talk about the effects quick, because that was one of the things that really kind of stood out to me in this film. They did some pretty experimental things, especially for the time, in terms of trying to be creative with special effects. There's one point in the beginning of the movie I couldn't help but notice they used like a negative film, like where the lights become the dark colors and the dark colors become light colors, and I think they were really trying to kind of use that to kind of convey a sense of almost like hallucination as you're approaching Count Orlok's castle. There's definitely experimentation with like jump cuts, especially to show Dracula like moving certain ways, or for doors opening. There's also like fade ins and fade outs. Like even at the end of the movie, during the climax, he like fades out into a puff of smoke, and when he's on the ship, he fades in and like fades out as he's in like the bowels of the ship and preying on the shipmates.
And they even use a very rudimentary stop motion during the sequence where Count Orlok puts himself into a coffin to ship himself on the boat.
The one critique that I will say, and I'm going to lump this into the effects part of it, there's certainly some lighting issues in this movie, and I'm assuming that this just has a lot to do with just like at the time and how they had to shoot things, because it's difficult to film things when it's dark out and when it's night out. And what a lot of movies used to have to do back in the day was film during the day and use filters to make it look like it's night, except it doesn't even really seem like they try to use filters at all to kind of make it seem like it's nighttime. There's even one shot where it shows like the boat or the ship from a distance, and you can literally see the sun gleaming through the sails. Something that I expected to kind of be a strong point from a German expressionist gothic film would be like the lighting and like the shadows, which it does a decent job like with shadows a little bit here and there, especially when it comes to Count Orlok's shadows. But overall, I just thought like the lighting was really off, and you could just tell like almost the majority of the end of the film was shot during the day, and you have Count Orlok walking around with a coffin in broad daylight. I don't know, it just took me out of it. When Hutter is in the pub on his way to Count Orlok's castle, the villagers won't let him leave because they're saying there's a werewolf running about at night, and it cuts to a shot of a hyena for some reason. Another thing about the differences in the two films, or the two versions we watched, was the music, or the score. At least for me, I really did not like the score that I got stuck listening to. The original score that they would play, the orchestra would play in the theaters, from what I read, is mostly lost, and all that exists now is like
basically reconstructed versions of it. I don't know if mine's supposed to be one of those reconstructed ones that I heard, but I don't know, I really didn't like it at all. It didn't seem like it matched the tone of the film at all. There was specific scenes where it was way too upbeat. Like, it had like this plucky xylophone part in it at times, and I felt like I was listening to like spooky, scary skeletons. This last thing that I had to mention, because to me it felt like something that we would incorporate into one of our skits, and you know what? We haven't filmed the skit for this video yet, so maybe it's in the skit that you just watched before this. But when Hutter is writing back to his wife, he's writing the letter to his wife, and he's talking about how the mosquitoes are terrible, and he had mosquito bites on his neck that were really close together because he didn't realize it was a vampire bite on his neck. I laughed out loud when I read that.
The film definitely was unintentionally hilarious in some instances. For me in particular, I love the scene of Orlok carrying his coffin to his new house in the German town. It's like a Charlie Chaplin skit. He's just like running back and forth all across these different streets and scenes, carrying this huge coffin. I think that kind of goes to another one of my criticisms of the film, which is just the kind of uneven pacing and the feeling that a lot of the scenes are very extraneous and not really needed. The final climax, I mean, they go for so long talking about the plague and showing people dying of the plague. It kind of loses focus in a lot of ways. I even felt that way in the middle during the boat sequence, which I know the boat sequence is kind of one of the more famous sequences because that's where you get Nosferatu rising up out of the coffin, a completely iconic shot and a brilliant scene. I love that. But just kind of the sailors slowly dying one by one. It's a very long sequence, a very long portion of the film. It just didn't really work for me dramatically because you don't get attached to any of these characters. So the dramatic stakes of this whole sequence are almost non-existent. It's just generic horror filler until we get to the German village, which is where the real plot is going to start happening.
The film is really just kind of lacking any sort of strong central character to root for. And I think the reason that is Van Helsing. The character itself is not necessarily missing from the movie, but in a lot of ways it feels like it is. In fact, when Miguel and I were talking about the movie briefly before we started filming the review, I didn't even realize that professor character that was talking about Venus flytraps was Van Helsing, because it just seemed like some random professor character. Like, there's no character in this movie that seems to be like even steps with Count Orlok.
But what we do have instead now is Hutter's wife. And so Hutter comes back home, and you would expect, right, from this traditional narrative, as we were saying, now he's going to tell his wife everything that happened, he's going to make a plan, he's going to have a confrontation with Nosferatu, and he's going to heroically defeat him, but that isn't what happens. He hides everything from his wife. He tells her, don't read this book that I've brought back, about the vampires. And every time he looks across the street at that house where Nosferatu is, literally he breaks down mentally. He can't even look. He starts crying and basically hiding away. So he's so completely broken from the trauma that he cannot function as the hero. And so his wife actually secretly reads the book against his wishes and learns that the only way to break the curse of the vampire is for a young woman pure of heart to willingly offer her blood to him. On one level, it's interesting because as we were talking about the theme of sexual abuse, the act that breaks this pattern is the consent of a woman. And so she's now put in the position of being the hero of the narrative, the one who vanquishes the evil force. But the way in which she has to do this is very, very interesting dramatically. Because she has to give her blood to him willingly, does that mean at some level that she is leaving her husband for him? That she wants him in some way? Because there does seem to be this tension in the film where she keeps looking across the street at him and staring at him, and they're staring at each other. Now, when I watched it, I thought, oh, Nosferatu must be hypnotizing her. But then if he's hypnotizing her, then that means that she's not giving her blood to him willingly, which would mean the climax wouldn't make any sense, because then why would the curse be broken? And we have this sort of emasculated, disempowered male character who we thought was going to be our hero, and now his wife is basically leaving him for this vampire and sacrificing herself for her husband, for the greater community. It's less filmically satisfying, right, than the showdown between these two rival forces, right, the Van Helsing and the Dracula. But it brings up a lot of confounding, questions about life and our relationships that I think is actually really interesting to grapple with.
Nosferatu is seen feeding on nothing but male victims up until that point. It could be implied that Nosferatu himself is attracted to men. And again, linking that back into F.W. Murnau, who was a gay man, I think the film can absolutely be read as a metaphor for his own internalized homophobia and like his own internalized struggles of being a gay man. You could imagine being gay back then in the 1920s would almost feel like a curse, and he would be made to feel like a monster. And you could imagine that if you're being made to feel that way because of your own sexuality, because of these external forces that are making you feel that way, hoping that there's a way out, hoping that there's a solution. And obviously, like a very one of the first things you would think of is trying to be with a woman. Like, you would hope that that would maybe solve or cure your homosexuality, for lack of better words. And again, when you really think about it that way, it's hard to ignore that reading of the film. And it gets surprisingly risque at the end of the film. In fact, like the scene when it shows Nosferatu feeding on her, it's very creepy. It's this like voyeuristic kind of shot that's like far away and through the door. There's not much movement at all. It's like he's just sitting there on her neck, and it lingers on that shot for a while. And I was surprised at I'm surprised that they showed it that clearly and lingered on it for that long. It was very uncomfortable.
He looks transfixed, like he's so caught up in this moment. He has no idea anything else is happening. He's just latched onto her, and she's just lying there completely passive, turned away from the camera. So you get this feeling like you're watching a really, really intimate and also potentially very abusive thing happening, and you're like this passive viewer. You can't intervene. And it's so grounded. It's almost like you feel like you're walking by an open doorway and you look in and you see someone on top of another person, and you don't know, oh my God, is this consensual or not? Or what's happening here? And sort of you're caught up in this conflicted moment and feel disempowered and confused and disoriented and terrified. And so that's the emotional sensation you get in that scene, and it's incredible.
A bit of the way that the end of that movie was executed, I found a little bit funny. After you see that shot of Count Orlok biting her neck and sitting on her neck, basically he sits there all night and like loses all track of time, and it's morning, and then by the time he goes to get out of there, it's already daylight, and the daylight kills him on the spot there, and he disappears into a puff of smoke. So it's almost like that virgin blood to him was so delicious that he lost all track of time, and that walk of shame in the morning was what did him in.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's definitely what the film is implying. That is completely the kind of allegory that they're putting in front there. But with that, I feel like we've discussed almost everything we wanted to say about this film. I mean, there is a lot of interesting elements in it thematically, and to this day, I found it very disturbing, very creepy, precisely because of that thematic content and how grounded it was in a lot of ways. So for a rating, we're going to give this one 4 mysterious mosquito bites out of 5.
yeah, it really is a groundbreaking film in so many ways. It really set the table for so many horror movies, gothic-themed movies, vampire movies to come after it. It is a very grounded, creepy, and scary film, even 100 years later. And it's absolutely worth watching for any horror film buff.
So that caps off our 2021 Spooktober review of Nosferatu. We hope you enjoyed it. If you did, please like, subscribe, comment, tell us what you think about the film, what your favorite vampire film is, and how you think Nosferatu compares with it. And we will see you on the other side.